Hey Bulldogs, Chris Bryant here, and in today's 5-minute video boot camp for you CCNA and CCNP route candidates, we're going to talk about the OSPF router ID for about a minute, and then we're going to see it in action and some really good exam pointers here, as you'll see in just a moment. So let's go ahead and start that 5-minute clock. Now, with this OSPF RID, especially in your NA studies when you're introduced to OSPF for the first time, it's pretty overwhelming because there's a lot more to OSPF than there is, of course, to RIP. Or to EIGRP as well. And the OSPF router ID, you have to know how to calculate it for your exams, of course, and we don't go into a lot of detail in the NA about where it comes into play or why we do this. But I want to talk to you for just a moment about how it comes into play in a lab environment, whether you're using packet tracer or you're using live equipment. And that's because it's an excellent organizational tool. What I really try to do in my labs is go back and have some kind of indication in the IP address itself about what router I'm on. So if I can, if I've got, say, router 4, I'm going to use a 4 as the last digit in that IP address, or actually the entire last octet. Now, if you're working on some advanced labs or some subnetting, you might not be able to do that. But what I love about the OSPF RID is that if you follow this rule that I'm going to show you, you'll always be able to look at the OSPF RID and say, here is the exact router that I'm working on. And if you're in a 3-router lab, that might not sound like such a big deal, but it'll definitely be a big deal as your labs do get larger. Now let's review quickly those rules for that OSPF RID default. If there's a loopback interface on the router, that IP address of that interface is the RID. If there are multiple loopbacks, the highest IP address from that group of loopbacks is the RID. And if there are no loopbacks, the highest IP address on a physical address is the RID. Now, that was all, fine with me when I started studying for the NA, but what really threw me is when I read in a book, well, the interface doesn't have to be enabled with OSPF in order to have its IP address used as the RID. And that just didn't sound right to me. I don't know if you had that same experience or if you're just getting to it in your studies, if you just say, well, that just sounds funny. Can that possibly be right? Well, you don't want to be second guessing yourself on an exam day. So what we're going to do right now is make absolutely sure it's right, and I'm going to give you one more real world tip in there as well. Might help on the test too. So let's just go ahead and run show IP OSPF neighbor. And you can see that router 1 has 2 existing adjacencies, one with a neighbor ID of all 2s, one with a neighbor ID of all 3s. What I like about this in a lab environment, especially as you climb the ladder, you're going after your NP, maybe you're going after your IE after that, you start getting 7, 8, 9, 10, even more routers than that. You can look at this neighbor ID, and if you see 7777, it's like, okay, I know that's router 7. So it's a really good habit to get into even when you're working with a smaller lab. Now, here's the key. How did we get to that value? And here's a good practice exam question for you, because I don't have a real complex config here on router 1. You can see a loopback interface right here with the all ones address. There's a serial 0 IP address of 172.12.123.1, and that's actually all I have. So a very short OSPF config here, and what we're concentrating on is not what is here, but what's not here, because we have not enabled that loopback interface with OSPF. We're not advertising it to any of those neighbors. But the key to remember here is that that particular IP address on that loopback, even though it is not enabled with OSPF, it is going to be this local router's RID, and there's the proof, 1111. So that's just it's a quirky rule, but you really need to keep that in mind, especially on your NA exam day. Now let me show you something with another command here, and it's a good rule of thumb to live by, period. I'm going to show you how to hard code that OSPF RID and give you a little word of advice with this command as well. Because under the OSPF config itself, we have a command called router ID. And there it is, and it just says router ID for this OSPF process. Fine and dandy. So we use the router ID command, and let's say we want to set it to all 11s. Now that's an interesting prompt. Reload or clear IP OSPF process for this to take effect. So this is one of those rare commands in Cisco that does not take effect immediately. So if I decide to clear the process, here's what I really want to show you. Note first off that the router is using uppercase to yell at you. Reset all OSPF processes, and the default prompt is even no. When you see one of these things, it's kind of a hint that you might be doing something wrong. If you see both, you better be really sure that you want to do what you're about to do. So let me stop that timer. We're going to hit it right at 5 minutes here. And what happened? When I set it, you'll notice my adjacencies went down. And over hub and spoke, they're going to take a little time to come back. So it's not something you want to do in the middle of a day for a production network, okay? But it's a great command to keep in mind or have down cold, not just for your NA and NP route exams, but also, of course, for your lab work as well. So again, that's the router ID command. It does not take effect immediately, and you do either have to reload the router entirely or clear your IP OSPF process, which in turn is going to tear your adjacencies down. Have that command down, have these rules for the OSPF RID default, and you're on your way to exam success. Thanks for watching today's 5-minute boot camp. Every single day a new Cisco or CompTIA skill in 5 minutes or less. Thanks for watching.